Captain's Log, Day 220. After several weeks of excitement studying various microorganisms from several different planets, now we have an even more exciting discovery. A planet that contains an actual civilization.
The people there call their planet Retardia, and thus I will be referring to them as Retardians.
I take it then that you've cracked their language.
Affirmative. Their language has been added to the ship's database and successfully translated. If they were to contact our vessel, the system would translate everything they say with a high degree of accuracy.
So what can you guys tell me about them?
They're mammalian and anthropomorphic. Really, it would be hard to distinguish them from humans by just looking at them.
And their culture is much like ours was during the early part of the late Christian era, so much so that our translation matrix even puts Christ's name in place of one of their own gods.
Their technology, engineering, and architecture are reminiscent of late Christian era as well. Sounds like the threat level is fairly moderate, at least in terms of intent. Intent maybe, but technologically their threat level is pretty low. I mean, unless they start firing nukes at us or something, that would not be good. Do they have nukes? Affirmative. Well, then I guess their threat level is pretty moderate overall.
Bridge to conference room.
Go ahead, Commander.
We've just received a pre-recorded message from the planet's surface, audio-visual.
Patch it through to the conference room.
Aye, sir.
When we look at the most profound question of life, does God exist? We'll find evidences that show us God is real. Let's look at 6.
What the hell was that? Alexa, pause the video!
Lieutenant, report.
We're under attack. The ship has been hit with some kind of religious indoctrination.
Red alert, all hands to battle stations. Captain, please come to the bridge. On the bridge?
Lieutenant Jackson, what's the damage?
The ship is undamaged for the time being, Captain, but if you continue to watch that video, there's a possibility that some of the crew will be brainwashed into complete religitardation.
Well, I can't not watch it. This is what we're out here for. We have to learn everything we can about this culture. We all knew there were risks to this mission when we came aboard. Resume the video, Lieutenant. Put it on the main viewer.
Aye, sir?
Let's look at 6 proofs that show God exists. Number 1, the universe must have a cause.
Yeah, it was caused by the Big Bang. That's not proof of God, though.
The most fundamental law of science is the law of cause and effect.
What?
The most fundamental law of science?
And it says that for every material effect we see, there is a cause that came before it or was simultaneous to it, and that is greater than it.
Hey, who's he quoting?
That quote is not in the ship's database. People have often spoken on cause and effect in science and philosophy, but the specific quote may be a saying that only people from his world would recognize.
The universe is a material effect. So what caused the universe?
The Big Bang!
You see, if you don't believe in a creator, then you have to suggest something like a singularity.
No, I don't suggest a singularity. It was the Big Bang. Isn't the singularity hypothesis part of the Big Bang theory? It's been part of old, outdated variations of the Big Bang theory, but it's not a necessary part of it.
That's what is popular today, that there was some type of singularity that exploded in something called the Big Bang. But then when you try to get down to the bottom of what's a singularity, well, what we hear from the scientific community that suggests to us, the cosmologists, they say, well, a singularity was something that popped into existence from nothing.
I don't know what they're telling people on his planet, but on Earth, the Big Bang Theory was originally referred to as hypothesis of the primeval atom, the idea being that some hypothetical atom became very hot and exploded. And my point here is that atoms are composed of subatomic particles, which are made of elementary particles, which are basically just perturbations of energy, which is a constant. Energy cannot be created, nor can it be destroyed. It can only change.
That means energy's just always existed, right?
Exactly. So, obviously, the thing that went bang didn't just pop into existence from nothing. There's always been something.
I bet our universe exists within a multiverse.
Why, yes, Captain Yang, it probably does.
Do you know that if there ever were a time when there was nothing, that's exactly what we would have now? The idea that something popped into existence from nothing is simply not a scientific idea.
On that we agree.
You see, they're suggesting that that singularity is somehow natural, but it behaves supernaturally. They say that that singularity wouldn't have followed the laws of nature. Well then, so what are we left with? We're left with the fact that the universe had a beginning and it was not a natural cause. It was something above nature. It was something super nature, something supernatural.
Ha! That doesn't apply to the multiverse, does it, religitard?
And so when we see the material effect of the universe, we can know that there was a supernatural creator that caused the universe.
No.
Proof number 2. Design demands a designer.
Yeah, designs are designed by designers, but none of those designers are gods. The designer of a rocket, for example, is a human being.
It is a truism that everybody recognizes that this universe looks designed.
I don't think it looks designed. I think it looks like it formed naturally.
In fact, when we see the various different aspects of nature, and we see birds and squirrels and trees, and we see all of the things that they do so well, many times we as humans, we try to copy and mimic that design.
He doesn't seem to be using that word design the way the dictionaries define it.
Yeah, birds, squirrels, and trees and the various aspects of nature don't really qualify as designs. But I guess if he thinks they were created by a god, it's understandable why he wouldn't realize that.
But often we don't do nearly as well as the design that we see in nature.
The design that we see in nature, that's an oxymoron.
We look at the design of the human body and the human hand and the arm and the leg and the brain.
I guess by design, what he's really talking about is shape and function.
And we see that those are some of the most advanced, technologically savvy pieces of equipment ever put together.
Technologically savvy pieces of equipment? Dude, humans are living organisms, not technology.
And we try to mimic them and copy them, and we can't do it as well.
Speak for your own culture, you primitive. Ours got that stuff down a long time ago.
Yeah, it's actually pretty amazing how fast our technology has managed to catch up with levels of biological development that nature took millions of years to accomplish through evolutionary processes.
Why? Because this universe exhibits design from the starry sky at night to the fingertips on your hand.
The reason your technology can't mimic your biology is because the universe is designed? That makes no sense whatsoever. What a non sequitur.
The design is overwhelming. It's everywhere.
No, the design is non-existent.
Right, the stars were formed naturally, and nothing about them looks designed. They look like gas clouds that gradually gravitated together until achieving thermonuclear fusion. I wouldn't expect this primitive alien to see it that way, but I'm an astrophysicist.
Yeah, and complex organisms are born from parent organisms through reproductive processes, not because someone designed them.
Where does design originate?
Somewhere in the omniverse, of course. Where else would it originate?
Yeah, can't really narrow it down much further than that.
Well, what you and I both know is that when you see things that function and they're complex, that design comes from an intelligent designer.
No, just because something has function and you perceive it to be complex doesn't mean it's designed. Something like a complex organism is a result of millions of years of evolution, which means it's not the result of design.
Big explosions just simply don't bring about order. They don't cause things that are functional and complex to come into existence.
Well, of course, the Big Bang didn't directly cause all the complexity in our universe. It's just what set our universe in motion. And our universe contains a lot of vacuum energy, which is what produces the elementary particles of matter that go into the subatomic particles of matter that make up the atoms, that make up the molecules, that make up the various compounds of matter and life forms. Notice how nowhere in there was there ever a need to use a god to explain anything.
The design we see in the universe demands a supernatural, intelligent designer.
Now, I think we've pretty firmly established that what you're perceiving as design is in fact just natural phenomena requiring no supernatural ID whatsoever.
Proof number 3. Life demands a supernatural life giver.
It most certainly does not. Human beings have had the ability for some time now to create new life forms by just using the right ingredients. Ingredients that occur naturally in the universe. Most of the universe won't have all the right conditions, but there are parts of it that do.
You see, in the material world, we have come to understand that there is a law of biology called the law of biogenesis.
Well, that's not a modernly recognized law of biology in our culture.
Sure, but in the past, a guy named Henry Charlton Bastian came up with something called biogenesis, but then Thomas Huxley got us in the habit of calling it abiogenesis, deciding biogenesis should refer to something else.
Law of biogenesis simply says this, that in this material, natural world, life comes from previously existing life of its own kind.
Is there a record of that quote?
Negative, Captain. That quote doesn't exist in our databanks either. Louis Pasteur promoted an idea that some have come to refer to as the law of biogenesis, even though that's not what he called it. But that was in response to a concept known as spontaneous generation, which hypothesized that something like a mouse or a maggot could spontaneously come into existence from like a bag of weed or a piece of rotting meat. He accurately identified that that's not how things work, but I think what our retardian is suggesting is that there's some scientific law in place that works in opposition to the concept of abiogenesis, but no such law exists. The law of biogenesis doesn't do that, and neither does any other law.
Now, when we look at how people used to think about life, they said, no, life can arise spontaneously from non-living chemicals.
There's no use to about it. Simple single-celled organisms can arise from non-living chemicals as long as you have the right ingredients.
And yet every single biological experiment has shown us that that simply is biologically impossible.
That's not true.
Life doesn't arise from non-living chemicals.
Depends on which life forms we're talking about, buddy.
From where did life arise?
Well, we don't know for sure where the very first organisms originate, other than somewhere in the omniverse. But on Earth, the earliest evidence we have for life comes from fissures on the seafloor.
Where did life originate if it doesn't arise from non-living chemicals?
Apparently, when he said, where does it originate, what he actually meant was, from what does it originate? Look, Retardian, we know you think God is the explanation, and you know we scientists think chemicals are the explanation. You know, because that's what's actually supported by the actual evidence that's actually available to us. Nothing supports the creation account in your holy book.
You see, the idea that there's no God suggests to us that there had to be some singularity without a cause.
Wrong.
That exploded, and that explosion brought about design.
Wrong again.
Which we've never, ever seen happen. And then, ultimately, somewhere the non-living chemicals gave rise to life. But that's biologically impossible.
No, it's not.
Life demands a supernatural creator.
No, it really doesn't, and we know that for a fact.
Proof number 4. Moral law demands a moral law giver.
Moral law? Where have I heard that before? I know what natural laws are, and I know what man-made laws are, but I need a reminder as to what moral laws are.
That's totally understandable, Captain. Earthlings just don't talk about morality very much these days. Our culture has transcended it. We've come to realize we're better off doing things in a significantly less judgmental way. A more technical way that addresses the root causes of any given problem, instead of relying too heavily on man-made laws, which have actually often been conflated with moral laws.
Ah, right, now I remember. It's all that good versus evil nonsense that got so many people killed.
Right, like the witch burnings, various religious wars, and the September 11th attack on the Twin Towers in 2001.
Wasn't that when Muslim terrorists hijacked a couple planes and flew them into a couple buildings, killing thousands of people?
Yep, they felt the need to do their moral duty and kill themselves while wiping out a bunch of evil infidels. Meanwhile, the U.S. citizens felt that it was the Muslims who were evil for killing all those innocent men, women, and children. That's one of the problems with morality. It's a subjective phenomenon with no objective empirical way of determining who's really morally righteous and who's really wicked. Notions of what's morally good and what's evil are based not on science, but on how a person was raised, indoctrinated, and conditioned to think.
If some things are objectively morally right,
Which they aren't.
and other things are objectively morally wrong,
Which they aren't.
then there must be a God.
Then there needn't be a God because morality isn't objective.
You see, if we evolved from primordial slime over multiplied millions of years, at what point did objective moral values arise?
They didn't.
We don't look at a dog and say that that dog objectively, morally violated some rule when he steals a bone from another dog. We don't say, hey, he violated a objective moral value. We just don't say that. But we do say that humans can perpetrate things that are objectively morally wrong, that humans can be involved in things that are morally right.
No, that's what you say. It's not what we're saying.
If that's true, there must be a God.
So since it's not true, evidently there needn't be a God.
Proof number 5, free will exists.
Actually, the waters get a little muddy on that topic. Our database has multiple definitions of free will, and some of them are consistent with our real-world experience, whereas others are not. So I need to know which version of free will you're referring to before I agree with you about it actually existing.
The atheistic idea that there is no God is founded on the idea of materialism.
Now, atheism is founded on being born without religious indoctrination. All babies are born not believing in gods or goddesses because they haven't been brainwashed to believe in that stuff.
The idea that this material world is all that there is, all that there was, and all that there ever will be.
I've never met a single person who thinks our world is the only one, or that it's all there is, or all that will ever be.
Yeah, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Because of that, atheism has to suggest that you as a person don't really have free will, that there is no being inside of your body or brain that is super matter.
Yeah, there's no soul in a person's brain, if that's what you mean. If we had souls, we wouldn't need brains.
That really what's going on in your brain is just electrons bouncing around, and you're the product of those bounces, and you don't really make decisions on your own. It's just the physical laws and properties going on in your brain.
Well, yeah, there's physics involved in it, but that doesn't mean it's not me making the decisions. It's still my brain.
Yeah, what a non sequitur.
If you are watching this video of your own volition, then the fact of the matter is there has to be a God that can account for that free will that you as a person have. There has to be a God if there is free will.
Another non sequitur. How does not being mind controlled by a deity somehow mean a deity must exist? This guy has a lot of arguments that depend on faulty premises.
And proof number 6, human reasoning. You see, we reason on a regular basis. We understand abstract ideas. If we were products of blind, chance, random processes over multiplied millions of years.
Personally, I'm a product of sexual reproduction, but do continue.
Reasoning and the laws of reasoning simply would have no explanation. And yet we reason together on a regular basis. From where does reason arise?
The brain.
It's got no naturalistic, atheistic explanation.
Actually, the brain is more consistent with naturalistic atheism than it is with religion. Like I said earlier, if we had souls, we wouldn't need brains.
That retardian had not one good argument, did he?
Nope, he sure didn't. Just a bunch of logical fallacies. There were times when it seemed like he was feigning ignorance on certain matters.
Lieutenant Jackson, send our responses to the Retardians. Let's see how they react. Aye, sir.